Shalom. Let me get straight into this lesson, but I've been looking forward to doing this lesson because, to kind of tie back into the lesson I did yesterday, I'm going to let this Edomite looking woman go into one of the branches of Christianity known as Mormonism or the Church of Mormon. And then I'm going to tie it into the deep Christianity psychological warfare that's been on your mind ever since you was a child. That's why some jakes are never coming out of Christianity. They're going to die in that lie. And it's so powerful when you get indoctrinated, because when you indoctrinated year after year, the same consistency, it is very hard to come out of that. That's why you have to throw everything away that you learned in modern day Christianity, and you have to start from scratch. And somebody got to tell you to do that, because a lot of people don't really get it. So I'm going to get into how diabolical Christianity is. And it's just one of the branches of modern day Christianity known as the Church of Mormon, was built on straight up racism, straight up demon time. And these Edomites, they got a perpetual hatred. They got an everlasting spiritual that manifests in a physical hatred for you. And you got to really understand that, Jake. All the things that you've been taught in modern Christianity is a lie. Not some of it, all of it. Let's get more into this.
God wanted us to have free choice, and to do so, he'd have to have a sacrifice in the form of one of his children giving up their lives and also being that exemplar for everybody. So Jesus came forward, and Lucifer, who would later become Satan, and they had opposing views.
And you see how it's confusion, is false doctrine. When you go into Lucifer, when you go into the scholarship of studying the Bible, that's not talking about, as you know, as the spiritual demon Satan. That's actually was talking about the king of Babylon. And that's a whole nother lesson, which would be mirroring America. You know what I'm saying? The king of Babylon, Babylon the Great, right? That name Lucifer just mean light bearer. So when you know the meaning of words, it takes that illusion off of them. So I ain't gonna jump too much, but I'm gonna stick on this subject, and then I'm gonna get in deep into this lesson.
All of his spirit children chose sides. 2/3 of us went with Jesus, and 1/3 of God's children went with Satan. Well, they lost the war, so they were cast out. They never see bodies. They can never become gods. And they are now these satanic forces that rule over the world, led by Satan. But of those 2/3, there were part of them that were kind of apathetic, kind of fence sitters was a word that one of the Mormon prophets used to describe them. And another phrase that the Mormon prophets used to describe these people who, like, they got to stay in heaven, they got to come down to earth, and they hadn't quite followed Satan, but they weren't the best spirit children of God. The phrase that the Mormon prophets used for them is less valiant. They were less valiant in their past life. And so what happened to those people, according to what my church taught me, was they were cursed to be born to African families. And here's why being born to African
You
families.
hear this? You hear this? Do you hear this? Do you hear this? I'm back this up. You need to focus in right now.
So what happened to those people, according to what my church taught me, was they were cursed to be born to African families. And here's why being born to African families was such a curse. Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, Cain kills Abel. Cain is cursed with black skin. He's then removed from the
You
garden.
hear that? And they put this great witchcraft on you with that black. You got Jakes from the complexion of Chris Brown. You got Jakes that look like so-called white people, Israelites. These are actual biblical Israelites. You got complexion of red, like again Chris Brown and other so-called celebrities in that same genre. You got Israelites that's dark skinned as the singer Seal. You got most Jakes is brown skinned, but they put that black label on you because of what the word black means: evil, wicked, sinister, untrustworthy, dirty, black male, black sheep. And I can go on and on. So let's stay on subject. Let's keep going.
The Garden of Eden, which was in America, in Jackson County, Missouri, Adam on diamond is the biblical Adamic language word that I was taught as a child. And so Cain was cast down to Africa, given black skin. All of his descendants were those less valiant spirits, so not only were they physically cursed, but they just weren't the best spirits to begin with. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking this is crazy, it
Oh,
absolutely
oh,
is.
oh yeah, she caught it. It's absolutely bugged out. It's insane. Let's get into this lesson. I wanted to warm you up before when I was getting ready to go into. Now, I'm gonna be doing a lesson in particular going into the different, these different religions like Mormonism. You got I think you got the Mormons and Latter Day Saints are kind of one and the same. Then you got the Jehovah Witness, because Joseph Smith, the Edomite, originated the Mormon, the Church of Mormon, and then you got Methodist, Presbyterian, go on and so on and so forth. Let's get into this. Let's get back into this. Let's lock in. Right. So number one, I'm gonna show you something. I'm gonna teach you something. What is passive aggressiveness through innocence and control? We're gonna get into this. And you can screenshot all these different slides I'm going to. It says the image of so-called white Jesus, and I have to say so-called because there's no ethnicity in the Bible known as white people. That's a new concept that's been introduced to you, and you've been brainwashed under that black and white concept, but it's not a real thing. The image of so-called white Jesus is often depicted as soft-spoken. That's why when we come off, hardcore sometimes, our people are removed. They're taken back by that. They're offended because what they've been introduced to is so-called white Jesus and his personality. I say that a lot because you need to focus in on that, because they created that idol to be soft-spoken, to love everybody, to be very, very effeminate like a woman. It says soft-spoken, gentle, glowing, calm, pale skin, blue eye, Eurocentric. Let's get more into this. Why is this passive aggressive? What does this really mean? It projects innocent and moral superiority while silently erasing the identities and stories of the people from the region Yahweh Shah, they say Jivas, was actually from. So they erased all the so-called black men that we descend from and whitewashed everything. And they said when they did that, you're not supposed to say nothing about it. When you say something about it, that's considered hate speech. That's gaslighting you. It says by presenting a so-called white sanitized version of a religious figure worship around the world. This image is worship around the entire world. It tells none so-called white people, this is your God, but he looks nothing like you. And that's heavy. This phrase right here is heavy because Jake so brainwashed and indoctrinated in their mind, they see that image. This isn't said directly. See, this is the key part right here. That's why I say every Edomite is a devil. Don't be deceived. This isn't said directly. It's wrapped in religious love and peace. That's why these Christians say love and peace, but behind their back, they got a sword because they will make our people convert to being Christians or they'll kill them. You devils don't want to talk about that history. You want to talk about love and peace, right? To control the narrative and gaslight. That's a passive part. That's the passive part. The aggression is the implication. Your features, your skin, your culture are not divined. It says cultural erasure and white supremacy. It says so-called white Jesus imagery became dominant during European colonization, the transatlantic slave trade, Christian missionary expansion. You see how they use these different words to dull down the rape, rob, killing, making people convert to being Christians. And when they don't accept this form of Christianity, they can just call it hate speech. You see how this works? It says it was often used as a psychological weapon. Remember, you can be under attack, not physically, but within your mind. It says this is hateful because it says it rewrites history. And they literally did this. Redefines God in the image of the oppressor. So that's when they sought to paint the images, first Maccabees 3:48 and Job 9:24. We covered the faces of the judges. They whitewashed everything. So when our people think about the Bible, that's why Jake, when they get a little truth, they'll deflect and call the Bible a white man book because of the images. They don't understand the hijack. It says demeans none so-called white identity by suggesting it is farther from the divine. Salakia. Psychological manipulation. Think about it. If every image of God you see as a child shows him as so-called white, this is heavy right here, and you're so-called black, brown, or indigenous, what does that do to your subconscious? This is what we're working on. It elevates so-called whiteness as divine. It makes Salakia. It makes you question your worth. Let's keep going. The psychological manipulation. I think I read that. Let's keep going. Gaslighting through religion. When people question so-called white image of Jesus, they're often met with, it doesn't matter what color he was. This code right here. This is literally the most rebuttal. We're all one in Christ. You Christians, you Edomites, you Jakes, the other tribes are sadists. But if it didn't matter, why push the so-called white image so hard for centuries? See, we analytical. We're not dumb. You got to come out that dumbed down state, analyze everything, question everything. That's gaslighting, minimizing the harm caused while refusing to correct it. Man, it's heavy. Screenshot all these. Let's keep going. Cultural erasure or eraser. It says why it's passive aggressive. It says presented as universal but exclude non-white people. Colonial use. Preached as peace enforced through violence. That's heavy. Psychological effects. And this, you got to be a real devil to talk about peace and love but yet kill people. That's a special kind of devil. Psychological effects seen begin again Salakia, but conditions minds. Right. Resistance to truth. Color doesn't matter. Argument. That's the rebuttal. Let me give me 1 second. Salakia, let me go back into this word benign. That's how you pronunciate it. Just want to make sure I'm being correct. It says benign. It says psychological effect seems benign. The third area, you know what I'm saying? Seems benign, but conditions minds, right? And that word benign means gentle, kind, all right, mild type of character that does not threaten health or life. So it says, let me see. Let's see, because my time is running short. Okay, so I think I gotta get this. It says so-called whiteness in the biblical narrative. We are the people of the Bible. For centuries, many so-called white Christians in the West, especially in Europe and the United States, have embraced a version of Christianity where so-called Jesus is white, biblical figures of so-called white, God's chosen people look like us. This creates a racially coded form of spiritual validation. And that's why you see the mega, you go to these sprawling campuses of these Christian churches, they look like universities because, and you got to figure out why do they support this? Because it empowers them, right? As far as this false identity, this false agenda. Screenshot this. Salakia, but I'm running out of time. Hopefully this lesson was edifying. Call Halal Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shah, Bahashim, Rachak, Kodash, Shalom.